I'd love to get into a few of the like finer details as we're getting like long in the episode here. I think we've kind of established like there is a history to this view, right? It's not baseless historically, right? There's lots of people throughout history who have been like prominent church fathers, especially Origen, who was one of our first, um, who believed this thing, right? So it's not uh, crazy to believe it. We've established that
Right.
people may have not heard it before, so now we've based it in that, right? And we've gone through to where eternal suffering or eternal conscious torment came about, and we know about like how it happens today, why we all believe a lot of those things, right? One thing that I want to go into, we've talked about how the word eternal in the Bible just means an age or an unknown amount of time, right? So I think
Yeah.
people can wrap their minds around, okay, well, maybe when it talks about in the Bible, like this eternal punishment thing, maybe it's not eternal, maybe it's just punishment for a while. I think then the next step to take, there's kind of like two steps in my mind of thinking about restoration is now where does the all kind of come into it, right? Because you quoted a couple verses that Paul talks about where it's Christ desire that all come or that every knee will bow, right? Talked about that. How do you contrast those verses to certain verses like a lot of Calvinists will use in Romans 9 where it's talking about the remnant of Israel, right? Or in Luke, um, I forget where, in Luke where Christ is talking about the narrow gate and only a few will find it, right? How do you contrast those like all and every statements of praise with like there's a few that will find this path, that kind of thing?
Good question. I mean, it's encouraged people. I don't know if you can read it, but that's my
Yeah, we see it.
book. Heaven's Door is wider than you ever believe. And I deal with
Mm-hmm.
all those issues in that book. Because those are important issues to bring up for sure.
Yeah.
Let me see which one. You said Romans 9. That's a big one that the Calvinists always come up with on that one. That God hardened Pharaoh's heart, that who are we to say that the potter cannot make some vessels noble for noble use and some for common use, right?
Mm-hmm.
And talks about vessels of wrath. I deal with that in my book, but a couple of things that come to mind just very quickly. Number one, Paul called himself an object of God's wrath who was chained. He says in Ephesians that you were once objects of wrath, now you have been restored or you've been brought into his kingdom. So yeah, when we're walking away from God, in a sense, we're object of his wrath. But what is the whole purpose of salvation? To draw us into God again, right?
Mm.
Be clear.
Yeah.
The
And what's the
word
purpose of his
for
wrath too is an interesting thing to think about as well.
right, that's a good point. You know,
Yeah.
a lot of times it's chastisement. It's not punishment for the sake of punishing. It's
Mm.
punishment for the sake of restoration. Like I said, my father and my mother, I knew that they would never abandon me. They would discipline me. They wouldn't abandon me. I did that with my children. One of my son's friends wrote to me, this is now several years ago, and he said, Mr. Saris, he said, what was the most important lesson you taught your children? Gee whiz. I taught them so many different lessons. I mean, that was what I was trying to do. You know, we homeschooled them. I'm trying to teach them scripture. I'm trying to teach them all kinds of other things that go on there. And but I thought about that for quite a bit, and I thought, well, really, I guess the real bottom line was I taught them that I loved them, and I did that three ways. Number one, I was firm in discipline because I wanted them to know that there are consequences to actions. So that when I said yes, I meant yes. When I said no, I meant no. And that I would discipline them. I can remember one time when a group of my children and some of their friends, we were going to a McDonald's, and we got out of the car, and I saw my son running across the parking lot to go into the McDonald's. And as he was doing that, I saw a car coming toward him. He was about maybe 5 years old. And I yelled out, I said, Billy, stop, back. And the car didn't see him. He didn't see the car, but immediately he came back. And I grabbed a hold of him. I said, good boy. I wanted him to know that discipline was important. So I disciplined them firmly. Second thing I did was I wanted my children to know that they were important to me. There was one occasion where my daughter was going to be performing in this, it was called the Schubert Festival. She took piano lessons, and she was able to perform in this one thing where they had judges that come along and they do different things. Well, it happened to be on the day where I was off on a retreat, a very high level retreat of Christian men called the New Canaan Society, at a very upscale location in New Jersey, in the Pocono or the Catskills. And I got up on Saturday morning. I thought, my daughter needs to know that she's important to me. I mean, here I am taking this, going off to this nice, wonderful situation, learning some good things, having some great relationships with people. My daughter needs to know that she's important. So I drove an hour and a half to find out where she was. I got there in time to walk in, see her perform, give her a hug, and then I left and went back to the event. But I wanted her to know that she was important to me. Then the third thing I wanted to do was I wanted the children to know that I was approachable, that they had to do what I told them to do, but they could question it. They didn't just have to do it because I said it. And so I wanted them to know that that I was approachable. They could challenge what I believed and what I said. If I listened to their challenge and said, no, you still got to do it this way, they had to do it. But I was open to doing that. I remember one time my one daughter loved or was really beginning to really enjoy anime, right? And I had come to the conclusion that this was not good. And I told her that. I said, sweetheart, I don't think you ought to be watching the anime. It's not really good. She said, have you ever watched any of it, Dad? I said, no. She said, why don't you watch one with me? I thought, oh, okay. So I watched it. It was wonderful. The values were great. It was very creative in a different way. It was really quite good. I thought, something, sweetheart, that's not a problem. If you get some of these things that have the wrong kinds of values, that's one thing, but this I thought was great. So I was approachable. She knew that she could challenge what I said without me just coming down hard and saying, okay, you got to believe it. Mm-hmm. So those were the three ways that I taught my children that I loved. And those are the three things that God does for us as well. He's firm. He wants us to be doing what he says to do. Mm-hmm. He knows that we're important, and he's approachable. We can go and talk to him and ask him and seek answers from him. Anyway, getting back to Romans chapter 9, one of the things it talks about hardening Pharaoh's heart. The word for harden in the Hebrew and in the Greek there actually means to make firm. God made firm Pharaoh's heart. What God was trying to do in the whole concept of what was going on in Israel and in the ancient Near East around Israel and Egypt and all those places, God wanted to make his name known to all the people. And he wanted his power to become known to all the people. And so he wanted to also make known that he was a God who restored his people, who was able to deliver them from bondage, that kind of stuff. So he's teaching. This is a teaching lesson that God has, and God teaches not only by didactic, where he's actually writing down the 10 commandments, but also through history. He's teaching things that are happening. And so what he needed to do was make Pharaoh's heart firm so that Pharaoh would not give in too quickly, so that he could show the extent of his power. And so that he was able to bring all 10 plagues on Egypt instead of having Pharaoh give in after the first one or the second one or the third one. And so what that means is he made his heart firm. It didn't mean that he hardened him so that he could never come to acknowledge the truth, because some of his magicians, after I think it was the third plague or whatever, said they had hardened their hearts as well. Then they repented, and they said, they went up to Pharaoh and said, hey, Pharaoh, you gotta let these guys go, because this is bad news for us. So it was not a hardening that was going to go on forever. It was just a hardening in the sense of making it firm so that God was able then to display his power, right, and redeem his people from bondage. Another aspect of that, it says, are they, some vessels are for honorable use, some are for common use. It doesn't say it's for bad use, it's for common use. And what happens is, in the context there, it's talking about Jacob and Esau. Jacob I loved, Esau I hated. It's actually referring, it's a verse that comes out of Malachi. It's referring to the people, the descendants of Jacob and the descendants of Esau. And what God was saying was, I chose the descendants of Jacob to be the ones I'm going to use for the honorable use of fulfilling the promise I gave to Abraham. And Esau, I'm not going to use that. And it was so different because Esau was the oldest. You would have expected that God was going to choose him instead of Jacob, but no, God chose Jacob instead of Esau. But what did he choose him for? He didn't choose him for salvation. He chose them for service, that he was going to use them in service of God's service of bringing his message of salvation to mankind through the nation of Israel, which were the descendants of Jacob, as opposed to the descendants of Esau. Another one, what else did you say? You said
the narrow path.
Through the narrow gate. Yeah, that's very important. This gate leads to life, that gate leads to destruction. Jesus, in much of what he was teaching, was not talking about the afterlife. He's talking about life in this world now. There are people that are pursuing lots of wide, broad roads that lead to destruction in the sense of a wasted life. The narrow road is the one that leads to a truly meaningful, fulfilling life. That's what he's talking about in that situation. I think in my book, I say something like, it relates to who has the newest iPhone, the biggest car, the most money. I mean, all these things, they're trivial things. That's what a lot of people are pursuing, instead of pursuing things that are really leading to life, that are dynamic, that are going to experience, like having a family that you can rejoice in, doing something for God's kingdom, like you guys are working with Youth with a Mission, doing something significant. You could be going out making money. Who cares?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, how much money can you spend? You got George Soros and you got all these people that have so much money, Bill Gates and all these guys, they got so much, they couldn't spend it if they wanted to. And yet they seem to want more. And then what you find out is Bill Gates gets a divorce. And Jeff Bezos gets a divorce. They've got so much money. I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, Bill Gates' wife got $150 billion as part of the divorce settlement.
Jeez.
You know, it's like, okay, I got all this money, I got all this prestige, whatever, but I can't even keep my wife. I can't even keep a relationship with the woman who I'm supposed to be having a oneness relationship with.
Yeah.
And the same thing with Jeff Bezos. I mean, he's got all this phenomenal amounts of money, phenomenal amounts of prestige, but it's worthless. What is really important is your relationships with your wife, your children, your friends, the people that are respecting you, those kinds of things that are far more important than. So that road is narrow, whereas the road to destruction of worthless things. And by the way, the word destruction, it means ruin. It doesn't mean that it's death and everlasting punishment. That's not what it's talking about.